I'm sad that the 2022 season is over. They finished 7-10, which, like, fast forward, if you take a jump back to August before the season started, and someone from the future came to you and said the Jets finished 7-10 this year, I would have said, yeah, that checks out. I predicted them to win 7 or 8 games. I'm pretty sure the final one I ended up sitting on was 8-9. Just missed the mark there. But the frustrating thing is we know how it finished. They limped to the finish line. 7-4 turns into 7-10 very quickly. And now there are a lot of question marks that need to be answered about this New York Jets football team, which is kind of what I want to go through today, and the questions that we need to find answers to this offseason. The first one that jumps out, and it's not in any kind of chronological order. I kind of just did it in order of importance, in my opinion. Who's the quarterback? It's a question we've asked many, many, many times as a Jet fan. Who is your quarterback? Because going into 2023, I don't personally believe that you can run back Zach Wilson and Mike White and be satisfied there. I think you need to bring in a veteran. Who that veteran is, we'll spend a lot of time this offseason discussing. Off the top of my head, I will list off a few potential options, whether it be Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Gardner Minshew, Lamar Jackson, Ryan Tannehill, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith. People have brought up Sam Darnold. I don't know why, but they have. And add a list and multiple options. Some are better than others. Some you have to trade for. Others are going to cost high. Others are not going to cost very much. But the moral of the story is, who is going to be the quarterback for the New York Jets next year is the biggest one that I think the New York Jets have to answer. And if I was a betting man, which I am, I think the most likely, now, keep in mind, I want to preface this because I know how the commenters work. They react sometimes without hearing the full thing. This is not my preferred plan. This is saying what I think is actually going to happen. And if I had to bet, I believe the opening day starter for the New York Jets in 2023 is going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. Makes too much sense. You have two guys in Robert Saleh and Mike LaFleur who come from San Francisco, which is where Jimmy was. And Jimmy had a lot of success with Mike LaFleur as his passing game coordinator. They've worked very, very closely together. If they have that playoff mandate, or if the expectation is you got to make the playoffs in 2023, who do you think Robert Saleh and Mike LaFleur, assuming Mike LaFleur's here, because that is something that we're going to get into next, kind of in answering some of these questions. But I think if he hasn't been fired yet as of recording this on Tuesday evening before a Wednesday release, I don't necessarily know if that's going to end up happening. They're going to say we can do it with Jimmy G. We've done it before with Jimmy G. In 2019, they made the Super Bowl with Jimmy G. And again, I'm not saying that's my preference, but that's how these coaches think. When they're going to be put on the spot and saying there's a lot of pressure, they're going to want to go to what's familiar and what's comfortable with them. And that worked. So would a quarterback room of Jimmy G, Mike White, and Zach Wilson next year surprise you? It wouldn't surprise me at all. As I said, I think that's probably most likely. Would I like Derek Carr? I would. I think he's better than Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that would be better. Would Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or Lamar Jackson be splashier? Hell yeah, that would be splashier. And I'm not opposed to either of those options necessarily either. Lamar Jackson's probably the highest ceiling one because of his age and just he's an MVP candidate, or he won the MVP really in 2019. The issue there is what are you going to have to give up to get him? How much are you going to have to pay him? And all that stuff that goes on top of that. He did, and he's missed a little bit of time the last 2 years. That's the biggest thing there. Is it worth the risk? I would lean yes, but again, none of these options are a perfect solution for Joe Douglas and the New York Jets. That's why I'm glad that I'm not in Joe Douglas's shoes. I'm not the one who has to make that decision. But they have to figure the hell out who is quarterbacking this team in 2023. What is your plan at quarterback when you have such an important season where you need to take that next step? Yes, you went from 2 to 4 to 7 wins. That's great. You got to win 10 or 11 and be a playoff team next year. That's really not asking too much. Then I kind of hinted at it, but who's calling plays? And the next two are actually kind of together, which who is calling plays and which veteran are you adding to the staff? Because if you listen to Robert Saleh's press conference at the end of the season, he made it seem pretty clear that they're going to look to add a veteran. Now, we obviously know what happened with Knapp before the 2021 season. He tragically passes away in an accident. The distracted driver hits him when he's on his bike, I believe, which is just awful, terrible. And in the interim, they end up bringing in Beck, who was Zach Wilson's personal quarterback coach. And then they didn't bring back Beck, and they never replaced Knapp in 2021, which I understand. But in going into this year in 2022, it was pretty much Mike LaFleur and Rob Calabrese. This is on you to figure out. And it didn't work. And is it Zach Wilson? Is it those two guys? Is it a mix of both? Probably is a little bit, has to do with everything, all of those different circumstances, right? But what are they going to do? Are you going to bring in a Gary Kubiak, which is a name that's been brought up a ton, to be some sort of assistant? Now, I don't think you're hiring Gary Kubiak and he's going to say, I'm going to be a coordinator and call plays every week. I don't think that's likely, but as some sort of senior advisor who's there and just in it and could show LaFleur the ropes and help the whoever's starting at quarterback and help White and help Wilson if he's here, or if you draft a developmental quarterback in the middle rounds in this year's draft. That makes sense. I mean, I did a video at the end of the year of other guys who you could potentially add, veterans who have experience as either head coach or a longtime quarterback coach or a longtime offensive coordinator. Dirk Cutter, Ken Wisenhunt, Mark Trestman. Those are just a few that Frank Reich is one who's going to get brought up a lot. But if he's not hired as a head coach, I think he's going to get hired as a coordinator. And I don't necessarily know if I see the Jets moving on from LaFleur to give Reich that job. Maybe they do. I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing. I think Reich's had a ton of success as a coordinator and even as a head coach, getting a lot out of different offenses with a bunch of different quarterbacks. But I would put that as a pretty slim likelihood. But someone like Gary Kubiak makes a lot of sense. Someone like Dirk Cutter, who worked with Jameis Winston and actually got a lot out of Jameis Winston. Was that a perfect marriage? Did they ever end up developing Winston into a franchise guy? No, but they got a ton of yards and a ton of passing touchdowns out of a turnover machine there. So who is calling plays? Is it going to be Mike LaFleur? And if it is Mike LaFleur, which veteran are you adding? Because again, it can't be just run it back with just those two young guys as who's leading the way in the offense. They need a veteran voice in there. Who that is, Saleh's got to find him. And he hinted at it, and I think it's something that they do this offseason. And the final question before I really get into, I'm going to play the clip and talk about it. It has to do with Zach Wilson, Mike LaFleur. But the final question is Quinnen Williams. Now, Joe Douglas didn't give away too much. And some people that scared some people off. Not me personally, because I know that he's going into negotiations. He spoke and said that he wants to make Jamal Adams a Jet for life just to trade him. I don't think he's going to make that same mistake again and say something that he probably shouldn't. I do think Quinnen Williams gets an extension. I'm really not worried about it. Someone who had a monster year 4. He gets after the quarterback. He's important to this defense. He's a young building block player, a leader on this team. It's different than Jamal. It's different than Leonard Williams. It's different than Sam Darnold. Those are the three that people talk that people bring up, and they say, well, those are McCagnon guys that Douglas didn't want and traded. And then they say, oh, well, Quinnen Williams is another McCagnon guy. Is he gonna not sign him because that's not his own guy? A little bit different because we've seen him have the success with Robert Saleh. The Jets were going nowhere, and they had Leonard and Quinnen Williams. And Joe Douglas said, why am I going to pay Leonard Williams a boatload of money, which is ended up what Dave Gettleman ended up doing and the Giants ended up doing, when I could trade him because I have Quinnen and we're not going anywhere. So that was a smart move. Darnold, we know what happened there. And Jamal didn't want to be here and was asking for an insane amount of money. So I think it ended up working out in that sense. And I think it works out with Quinnen. He's probably going to get $20 million a year, if not maybe more than that. 5 years, $100 million, something like that. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's $22 million a year. And then you're looking at, what is that, 110 million over 5 years? He's going to get a mega deal, and he deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. And I'm not worried. As I said, I'm not really worried about it.